Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. Today we'll be making one of my favorite liquid soap recipes. It's made with 80% coconut oil and 20% olive oil, and I use this for basically everything around the house. I use it to wash my clothes, my dishes, my floors, the bathroom, myself. You can use it on your body and your hands. I often use it as a hand wash as well. It's just a great natural alternative to all the other store-bought, chemical products and surfactants and all those ingredients we're trying to avoid. So this one thing is just such a multi-purpose recipe that you can just use on everything. So it's a real game changer. I mean, especially when I first made it, and when I started using it, I was really surprised on how well it performed. And I just haven't needed to buy anything else, in regards to, cleaning and, or just the general all-purpose use that you get out of this. I haven't had to use anything else but this. So this is why it's just such a great recipe, and I highly recommend you give it a try, and of course save yourself a lot of money. Instead of buying 10 different products, you just use the one product. Right, so just to go over the recipe overview, this is, as mentioned before, made with 80% organic virgin coconut oil for its really high cleansing and lather capabilities. And it's just a really good cut through grease, especially if you're using it on your dishes. And it's really effective in removing stains from clothes as well. And the 20% olive oil, I've added that. The reason why I moved from 100% coconut oil, which I was doing originally, but I moved to lowering it to 80 and then adding 20% olive oil, and that's just to make it a little more milder on the skin, because it's got excellent conditioning qualities, as as olive oil is. And I found that it's a lot more gentle in this recipe. It just made it all around more gentle on the hands and the body, and more skin friendly and not as drying. And based on, because it's a 2 kilo batch or a 2,000 gram oil batch, in the lye calculator I do select 2 to 1 water to lye ratio. I find that to be most effective when you're cooking your paste. And it's easier to work with in the pot as well. It's a little more fluid. It's not so hard like a rock. So it just makes the whole process a lot easier. With bar soap, as you know, I always use 3% organic raw sugar, but for liquid soap I use 5%. And that's obviously for lather and conditioning properties. For the pink salt, as if you know much about liquid soap, salt actually thickens olive oil liquid soap, but considering there's only 20% in this recipe, so this salt here is purely for just thickening that 20% portion of it. The 5% sodium lactate, again the same ratio as with the raw sugar. That's a lather and conditioning booster as well. It makes the paste more fluid, and it makes the paste a lot more easier to dilute. It just really melts into the water after an hour or two, so doesn't require a lot of effort to actually dilute the paste. So the sodium lactate is just one of those magnificent additives in liquid soap, and if you've never tried it and you start trying it for the first time, you'll notice the benefits of using sodium lactate in your liquid soap recipe. So just to continue on with the recipe overview as it's continuing, this is part of the dilution phase. So what I do, and you'll see me do this in the video, the 40 grams guar gum, I do 20 grams per 1,000 grams of oil, but considering it's a double batch, that's 40 grams. And that I use that to actually thicken the liquid soap. And it has amazing skin conditioning properties as well, so this also adds to skin conditioning. You always hydrate guar gum in vegetable glycerin, and again, the reason why I use vegetable glycerin, because it's an effective way of superfatting your liquid soap. It's water soluble. It won't cause any separation, and it creates a lot more milder soap as well, so it's more gentle and more hydrating on the hands. So usually you hydrate for at least 30 minutes, guar gum in a vegetable glycerin, and you whisk it in and you leave it for 30 minutes. But for this particular batch that I did, I actually made it over a 3-day period. I usually sometimes do it in a day, but I've just been busy with other stuff, so I just leave it and over a 3-day period, and you'll see me do that in the video. And with neutralizing, because I always work with a 10% excess or a minus 10% super fat, which is what I do in the light calc. So that's basically a 10% excess of potassium hydroxide, and of course that's to ensure again that there are no free oils left in your soap recipe. You are going to be using this on your dishes and on your clothes. You don't want it to stay in your clothes or leave oily residues on your dishes. So that's why I always work with a 10% lye excess with laundry and dish suitable liquid soap recipes. I do that with all my liquid soap recipes, but specifically for this one it's really important. And I dilute, obviously I dissolve the 130 grams of citric acid and 150 grams of distilled water, and where I actually get the grapefruit seed extract purely for antioxidant purposes. 0.02% of grapefruit seed extract is enough in your total weight of your finished product, but I bump it up to 0.1. I just like to use 0.1%. But yes, you don't need much grapefruit seed extract in terms of antioxidant properties. It's really, really powerful, so a little bit really goes a long way. If you are wanting, I know some people always ask about preservatives in liquid soap. Grapefruit seed extract is a mild preservative as well. That's the only one that is an actual preservative and an antioxidant in one. So it's not quite broad spectrum as other preservatives, but if you wanted to add a ratio that it gives you peace of mind, if that's something you are worried about, you can bump it up to 3%, and that'll effectively keep your base nice and clean. But again, you don't need to use a preservative or an antioxidant at all if you're making it for home. Even you don't need to use guar gum if for home purposes. It will be a little watery, and that's because coconut oil liquid soap is very watery. And if you've ever made olive oil liquid soap, it's actually quite thick and viscous, so it just depends on what oils you're using. But yeah, by all means, these are optional, like the vegetable glycerin, the guar gum, the grapefruit seed extract. You don't have to do a likes if you don't want to, but I highly recommend you do if you are using it on your clothes and on the dishes. I always work with a 3.5 to 1 water to paste ratio. I'm basing that on the oil weight, whereas my paste weight is approximately 3 kilos or 3,000 grams. So essentially it's a 2.33 to 1 ratio. So if you do 3,000 grams times 2.33, that gives you 6,990 grams of distilled water. I've just rounded up to 7,000 grams of distilled water. So essentially it's just a little bit higher than a 2 to 1 ratio, but I don't bother weighing my paste. I always just work with a water to paste ratio based on the oil amount. I just find it easier in my mind to work with. But videos you've seen of me in the past when I've done like a 5 to 1 ratio, and it's actually not really a 5 to 1 ratio. It's more like a 3.5 to 4 to 1 ratio, because I wasn't working with actual paste weight. I was working with water to oil amount weight essentially. So it's always much less than that method. So as you see, like it's 3.5 to 1 water to paste based on oil amount, but really it's to just a little over 2-to-1 ratio. So that's just how I kind of calculate it. Everyone's got their own way of calculating it. This is just how I do it. You don't have to do it this way. You can do it with whatever way you're comfortable with, just as long as you essentially dilute your paste. That's the most important thing, because you do have to neutralize it if you're working with a lye excess. And so that's just how I kind of work everything out. And it hasn't let me down. I could change it and just weigh it every time, but as I've said in previous videos, it's what works for me, and I ain't going to fix what ain't broke. So that's just what I'm going to do. But just work with whatever method you're comfortable with. Right, so let's get to the fun bit, actually making the soap. So I always try and cover as much theory before I start as possible. So carefully combine your lye water into your oil base. Because I'm wearing gloves, when I push the record button to start before I added the lye, it didn't register my finger, so I apologize for that. I froze for a second thinking, oh gosh, there's no way for me to go back. Alright, so yeah, carefully combine your lye to your oil. And this process will take a good 10 to 15 minutes, because obviously if you've ever made liquid soap, you know that it takes a lot longer to trace than bar soap, probably 3 times the amount. So I have the heat on low. You don't want to crank the heat up a lot. So between 0 and 1 here, that's the lowest setting for the heat. I have it halfway, so I guess essentially 0.5. You don't need it very high at all. So 0.5 is I find just a really sweet spot when working with liquid soap on this particular hot plate. I got this hot plate from Kmart. It works exceptionally well. I love it. It was only $29. So if anyone's in Australia and you're looking to make liquid soap, or you're using a crock pot or whatever, and you wanted to move to something, you wanted to make like larger quantities, I recommend this combination. The hot plate and a stainless steel stock pot, they work exceptionally well for either liquid soap making or bar soap making. So definitely get your hands on these. I've never experienced any burning whatsoever. I actually use this to melt my soy wax as well. I've got a separate pot just for soy wax, and I fill the pot in, and again I put on 0.5 and I just leave it there for a good 20 minutes, half an hour, and I just stir it every now and then until it's completely melted. I've never even had it burn the soy wax either. If I'm melting my oils as well in any recipe, whether it's liquid soap or bar soap, I always use this method as well. I've never experienced it to burn or anything like that. So I don't like to use the microwave. I never use the microwave in terms of melting my hard oils. I always use this method. So here I switched the stick blender because I have a few on hand because it started to get a little hot, and I've had stick blenders burn on me in the past, so I've learned just to pulse every now and then and stir with one hand and swap the stick blender over when it starts to get a little warm. And doing it this way, I've had the same stick blenders now for over 12 months, so that method really does help and make a difference in increasing the life of your stick blender. So it's starting to thicken up quite nice now, so I'm about to retire the stick blender. It's not needed anymore, so I'm just giving it a few more bursts and a couple of more stirs, and it's done. So it's nice and thick. So I will just stir a little bit longer now, and then I will actually just put the lid on and leave it for a good half an hour to 45. It is on really low, like I said, 0.5, so I'm not worried it's not going to burn. There are times I've left it for an hour. So this is about 45 minutes later, and I just check every 45, half an hour to 45 minutes for a few times, and just make sure that it's not burning. It doesn't burn anyway. Like I said before, I've left it for a couple of hours before it's on really low, but you just want to make sure that everything's mixed well, so you check on it every half an hour to an hour. An hour is fine. I've done it before many times and nothing happens, so I just keep checking on it, and as you see, as more time goes, it gets thicker and thicker, and it becomes more translucent, and that's when it's starting to really set up and saponify. I do recommend just spreading it out over a 3-day period, just to be sure that everything is saponified. It doesn't saponify as readily as bar soap does, so that's why I like to spread it out over 2 or 3 days. And you'll see me check it. This is the same day now. You'll see me check it just periodically, and after about 5 hours having on really low heat, I just turn the heat off, and I find that method just to be effective, and at that time I can go off and do other things like packaging, or making other soaps, or whatever my day is. So it's really easy for me to just spread it over a few day period, and that method just works for me, and I just highly recommend you do it over a few days, like 3 days. You can do the no paste method. It's just completely up to you what you want to do. There are a couple of recipes with liquid soaps. I do the no paste method. It just depends, if you're kind of new to liquid soap making, just spread it over a 3-day period. There is a chance where if you don't cook it enough and you dilute your paste the same day, that it's not completely saponified. So you could be having free oils floating around in your recipe, and you don't want that, especially if you're after a nice clear liquid soap. So this is actually the next day. This is just a time lapse that I'm displaying in the video. So this is the next morning. I've come to it, and I'm just making sure everything's mixed in well, and I just keep it like that. And even when I came to it the next morning, even though I turned it off, I didn't leave the heat on. I still left it on the element. There was a lot of residual heat. It was still actually quite warm. It was sitting around the 28-degree mark, and it was actually below 20 degrees here in Sydney at that time that I made this. I made this batch a couple of weeks ago. So it was still actually quite warm in the pot. So if you just leave it on, you just cover it, a lot of the heat would stay in, and it'll help the saponification process overnight as well. And I do work with a 2-to-1 water to lye ratio. That's why you do see a little bit of water on the bottom, which is totally fine. It's just to keep it nice and fluid, so you don't have to really struggle with the paste, because the paste can be exceptionally hard if all the water evaporates out. So just having the 2-to-1 water to lye ratio really does amazing in making it easier to work with your soap paste, and the sodium lactate as well keeps it nice and easy to work with. And I'm about to dilute this paste. This is the second day, and of course even in the second day I check it a few times throughout the day, and a couple of hours before I am going to dilute, I just turn it on heat, like a little bit, the heat, just to warm it up. The paste at the moment sitting around 30 degrees Celsius, which is fine, doesn't have to be hot. And I'm doing a 3.5 to 1 ratio, to oil ratio. But in actual fact, because I just don't weigh my paste, I just go by oil amount. But if I wanted to actually really get technical, this dilution is actually it's 2.33 to 1, so roughly around that. So it's just basically, I have 3 kilos of soap paste in this batch, and obviously if you times it by 2.33, it works out to be 7,000 grams of distilled water, or 7 kilos, or 7 litres, whatever measurement you're going by. So as the paste is diluting, I have the heat on low again, and I just check on it every couple of hours, give it a good stir. And when I've noticed it, all dissolved, then I just turn the heat off, and again I cover it, I leave it overnight, and then on day 3 is when I neutralize the excess lye with citric acid, and add the guar gum and the antioxidants to it, and then bottle it up for later use. And what I do is I usually bottle them up in the distilled water containers that I get. And the great thing about that is the distilled water containers are bacteria free already. They've been sanitized. And the label also says that the package, the contents in the packaging is bacteria free. So it's a nice sanitary way of bottling up the liquid soap, I find. So I just do it that way, and I've never had any problems with it. It's really easy, and I just reuse the containers over and over again. And when I need to clean them out, I just wash them out thoroughly, and then I put some grain alcohol in it as well, and I give it a good shake and just let it sit, and for it to all evaporate out for a couple of days, and then I reuse the containers, the distilled water containers. So they're really great. So if you're in Australia or anywhere, you get distilled water containers, and that it's a sanitary enclosure or container, then by all means just shove your liquid soap in those containers. It just makes it so much easier, and it's easy to pour out as well, like when you're filling containers, or you want to scent a certain portion of it with certain essential oils or whatever the case may be. So it just offers greater flexibility by reusing the containers. So yeah, this is the next day, and of course overnight I don't leave the heat on. I turn the heat off, and I just put the lid on, and even when I come to it the next day, it's still quite warm. So this is the citric acid. I've diluted the citric acid in the distilled water, and I just add a slight portion at a time, and I stir and I blend, and then I retest pH until I see it sitting around 9, and then I stop adding the citric acid. And as you know, potassium hydroxide isn't as pure as sodium hydroxide, so sometimes you only need a little bit of citric acid and it's enough to neutralize, because each batch will be different. But for this particular batch, I had to use the whole 130 grams in the 150 grams of distilled water, and I would just shove the whole thing, because I know that's the maximum that is required to neutralize the 10% lye excess for this recipe. So as I got to the last bit of the citric acid, I knew, okay, I'll just dump the rest in and give it a good stir, and I know that the citric acid would have done its job and neutralized the liquid soap base. So I just do a nice quick test, and I see that it's around 9, perfect, and I'm comfortable. So I still give it a nice good stir just to make sure that everything's incorporated. And this is a really good method too for if you do have hard water, because citric acid and sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide creates sodium citrate, which is really good for combating soap scum. So it's a double effect. You get 2 uses out of neutralizing and doing a lye excess. So overnight I measured out 800 grams of vegetable palm-free glycerin, and I put 40 grams of guar gum in there, and I just let it hydrate overnight, and I just mix it in as I'm stick blending everything into each other, and it just slowly thickens up really nice. And of course I just scrape out the little bits, and this is the standard I do across any liquid soap recipe. I always use guar gum. I quite like it. It's actually a really great lather booster as well, surprisingly, and it has amazing skin conditioning benefits as well. So it's just an all-rounder excellent additive to just add in your liquid soaps. But of course it's like a double effect. You get good skin conditioning properties, and I find that it really helps boost lather as well. So it's just an all-rounder great additive to add. And once the batch has cooled down, I add my 22 grams or 0.1% of grapefruit seed extract. You don't need a whole lot of grapefruit seed extract if you're looking to provide antioxidant properties and extend your shelf life. A little goes a long way. And the manufacturer that I actually get it from suggests 0.02%, but I use much more than that. I use up to 0.1%. So I just bought all these. These were the containers I mentioned before. I did have a little bit of a spill. I'm not always a clean soap maker. Sometimes I spill. I'm like, oh yeah, it should be enough, no problem. And then it just overflows. So I just package them in these bottles as mentioned before, and it just works out really well. So, and I will be doing a lather test also, just with a little bit that's left on the bottom. So I'll package these up and clean the mess that I made, and then I'll do a quick lather test. And also adding the glycerin also is required, because that's the most effective way to hydrate the guar gum, so it doesn't clump up in your liquid soap base. But as you know, vegetable glycerin is water soluble, so it's a great way to super fat your liquid soap without it separating like oil does, or without it staining your clothes or dishes, because you're going to be using it on your clothes, and the last thing you want is to not stain them as well. So that's why grapefruit seed extract for this recipe is really good. And as you see, the lather is just it's just really bubbly and really creamy as well. The olive oil gives it a nice creaminess, plus all the additives like the sugar and the sodium lactate, and of course the coconut oil, the glycerin and the guar gum. They all go well together because they're all hand in hand, create excellent skin conditioning properties. So this is why I just highly recommend using all those additives. They do such an amazing job in creating a really all-rounder, just a fantastic liquid soap recipe. And as I've mentioned in the description, I use this recipe for everything: my clothes, to wash the dishes, the floors, everything. So there's not one thing I don't use this for. It's just a fantastic recipe, and you can replace all the other nasties that you might be purchasing with just this one product. Right, so thanks so much for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed the video and you find it useful. Remember to share and like this video and subscribe to my channel, and head on over to Facebook and Instagram and follow me there. And I'd love to hear your thoughts if you do try this recipe out. Leave your experience with the recipe in the comment section and how you find it, or message me on Instagram, whichever one's more convenient for you. I really like to hear when viewers actually try my recipes out and their thoughts on it. So thanks so much again, and I look forward to reading the comments. And happy liquid soap making. And until next time, stay safe. Bye for now.